I think for most of us, when we think about our priorities in our lives, it's family first, right? For most of us. Some people put their careers above. I understand God, church also in the mix, of course. But a huge priority and you know, decisions we make and what we do is driven by our families. You know, sometimes you may work a little bit harder because you know someone at home needs something. Maybe you decide where you want to live because what's going to be best for your spouse, what's going to be best for your children. All these things, where you live, how you live, is driven for so many of us by family. It's family first. So what about their families? The families of serial killers. Because there are serial killers who have their own families. Like where does the family stack up in their lives? How does you work that relationship? Right? You know, I come here and I work at Court TV. But when I go home, I'll talk about cases with, you know, my wife. I will talk about the business with my son, who's in the business as well of producing. And, you know, so it's not like it's not like totally separate. And, you know, they can watch me if they want. I hope they're watching, right? So there's not this like compartment, I can't even say it. Different columns for these parts of our lives, different compartments, right? So kind of mixes over and the family has something to do with it. And, you know, for me, choosing where I was working, what jobs I would take, where I would go, what I would do, what I wouldn't do, driven by family. But for these guys, yeah, they also had jobs, I guess, and careers, but they also had this whole serial killing thing going on. So what about their families and that relationship? Exactly how did that work? We're going to take a look at that tonight. We're also going to take a look at where do these guys come from? Like, how do you end up as a notorious serial killer? You know, is there something in the DNA? Is there some sort of defect that you're born with? Or are you a product of your environment? Are you the product of something that happened to you when you were a child, when you were growing up? Is it some sort of combination of things? And what sort of impact can your home life have on you becoming a really infamous killer, someone who is just literally just killing people, right? So you're destroying those lives and destroying the lives of all the families and friends of all these victims. Like, how does that happen? How do they get there? Something else we're going to talk about, because we've got some audio we're going to play for you, some recordings of Lionel Dahmer speaking with his son Jeffrey Dahmer. This is a guy who at some point was raising a serial killer, right? At some point, right? If it's your child, I'm not saying it's your fault, but you are raising someone to a certain extent who becomes a serial killer. And what is that like? How does that happen? There's a lot of dynamics here that I don't think are 100% clear, and we're going to try to create some clarity tonight when we bring in our experts. But first, let's take a look back. You know, Jeffrey Dahmer spoke at his sentencing, and we didn't get necessarily a deep insight into him by the words that he spoke at this sentencing, but he has spoken at other times as well. Let's take a listen.
In closing, I just want to say that I hope God has forgiven me. I know society will never be able to forgive me. I know the families of the victims will never be able to forgive me for what I have done. I promise I will pray each day to ask for their forgiveness when the hurt goes away, if ever. I have seen their tears, and if I could give my life right now to bring their loved ones back, I would do it. I am so very sorry. Your Honor, I know that you are about to sentence me. I ask for no consideration. I want you to know that I have been treated perfectly by the deputies who have been in your court and the deputies who work the jail. The deputies have treated me very professionally, and I want everyone to know that. They have not given me special treatment. Here is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of who I am the worst. But for that very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his unlimited patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life. Now to the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only God, be honor and glory forever and ever. I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done. Thank you, Your Honor, and I am prepared for your sentence, which I know will be the maximum. I ask for no consideration.
So now what I want to play for you, and this is from a brand new series that's being released, a Fox Nations docuseries, My Son Jeffrey, The Dahmer Family Tapes. Conversations between Lionel Dahmer and his son Jeffrey. Again, giving us a little more insight into the nature of this father-son relationship and the life that Jeffrey Dahmer lived, and how he got to where he ended up, which is right there in court, and then in prison, and then killed in prison. Let's take a listen.
I was so wrapped up in what I was doing.
Right.
I felt I was going to continue doing that for the rest of my life.
He was going to target people specifically. He was going to talk to people and find out what their story was. He was going to find out if they were close to their families. What he was doing was trying to determine if this person that he was conversing with would be missed if they were to disappear.
Interesting insight. Let's bring in our guest to get even more insight tonight. A psychologist, researcher, expert on violent crime, and co-author of The New Evil. Dr. Gary Brucato is back with us tonight in Portland, Oregon. Psychologist and author of The Minds of Mass Killers, Understanding and Interrupting the Pathway of Violence. Siobhan Scott is with us. And in Los Angeles, California, clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, Dr. Judy Ho. Great to see everyone tonight. Thank you for being here. Nature versus nurture, Dr. Gary Brucato. When we start looking at people like Jeffrey Dahmer, from your perspective, how much of it is they're born and they're, we always say wired differently, versus things that happen to them as he's growing up and as a child and as a teenager, et cetera?
I think there's a combination that is required. I think that there are certain brain areas that we know to be abnormal in individuals that have been studied, that have psychopathic character structures, that commit horrendous violent offenses like Dahmer committed. And yet what it appears is that if an individual like that is treated well by the world, loved, cared about, so forth, some of those traits could actually be used in a pro-social way. The individual could be fearless, could be the kind of person who would throw himself on a grenade to save a bunch of people because he's not scared, things like that. But if an individual like that is treated horrendously, they are twisted in the direction, I think, of trying to level the playing field. And then will utilize those abilities that they have and that ability to shut their emotions down in a horrendous way. So I think of some of these people as having two ingredients that seem to be necessary.
Siobhan, as we think about the lives and Jeffrey Dahmer, we're getting a little more insight now into all of that, but for him, this is fascinating to me that you could be wired a certain way and you can go a good way or you can go a completely bad way. And that's got to be tough on the people in a serial killer's life, like a parent or a grandparent who has raised this child into adulthood and seeing the way they've turned.
Yeah, I think they're absolutely devastated by it. And in many cases, perhaps not all, but in many cases, I look at the family members as victims of the whole thing too, because their lives are changed forever and they feel shame, they feel ostracized, and it's something that they never get over. So, you know, it's a lot to look at and a lot to take apart. And I think there are many, many cases where there has been horrendous abuse, but in other cases, and I saw the Dahmer case as one of those where there was an unstable home, there was a mother with mental illness apparently, but I don't know that Dahmer was ever tortured as a child, but I'm sure his parents went over that repeatedly, wondering what did they do that caused this.
Now, it was interesting at his sentencing, he mentioned God and prayers, Dr. Judy Ho. Let's take a listen to more from Fox Nation's new docuseries, My Son Jeffrey, the Dahmer Family Tapes, because this issue comes up.
Everything his father has wanted to try to get him going in the right direction, Jeffrey Dahmer has failed. So now there's Lionel Dahmer saying, what am I going to do with my son? What's left?
Have you done any praying at all to God?
Not yet.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Why do you feel that you haven't? Can I ask that?
Because I feel that, I don't know, I just feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because if I fail again.
But I'm failing too.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time I'm failing.
I just haven't psyched myself up to do that yet.
Dr. Judy Ho, how about this notion of failure? Growing up, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that. And then Jeffrey Dahmer apparently found something that he was good at, maybe? Is that part of the equation here?
Well, it's really interesting when we listen to the content of that call and sort of even his tone as he's talking about this idea of failing. It's kind of his biggest fear in many ways. And I can see that in the context of praying in God. The type of failure is, what if I fail again? What if I commit another crime? What if I can't repent and correct the error of my ways? And it's almost as if you start to talk to that, higher entity, and you have to start talking about morality and all of these different things, it's going to create such an enormous amount of cognitive dissonance in Jeffrey that he would have to then come to terms with all of the terrors that he's committed and still try to wrestle with this idea that maybe he can still be a good person. Maybe it's not too late for him. Maybe he has redeeming qualities. And you can hear his father, Lionel, trying to tell him that, all of us make mistakes. But I think in some ways, Jeff was just not ready to face up to the enormous amount of dissonance that it would create within himself to have to confront this idea of morality and a higher power and having to answer to that rather than just his own self-doubt and his own struggles with self-esteem from a young age.
Dr. Gary Brucato, I want to play another clip from Fox Nation's docuseries, My Son Jeffrey, the Dahmer Family Tapes, and this part talking about isolation and how things got out of control.
What was supposed to straighten Jeffrey Dahmer out, living with his grandmother, only created a nice isolated space, a private space, for him to continue to act out on these fantasies.
He didn't necessarily want to keep killing initially. He did tell me, though, once the killing started, it was such an adrenaline rush. It met his fantasy.
Something got terribly out of control. Nothing got resolved at all. It was just a terrible mixture. Do you think that maybe Satan was involved, or?
It was just a real strong driving obsession that became more powerful.
All right, Dr. Gary Brucato, I want to ask you about this isolation and fantasy. Do they feed off one another? And where do these types of fantasies come from?
It's important to make a distinction between a serial killer of the Dahmer variety and somebody of the, let's say, Ted Bundy variety, who's more of a slick, charming psychopath. Dahmer was a more socially awkward, mechanical person who wasn't particularly good at connecting with human beings and keeping them around because he was sort of odd. And I think originally for him, slipping into killing was all about retaining people forever. He said that the reason he ultimately began eating people, photographing them, things like that, was that it was a way of keeping them forever, turning it into a kind of a science where you figured out how to finally get them in a predictable way to be around you, so you didn't have to depend upon your awkward social skills. For people like this in isolation, usually years of either being abused or, in the Dahmer case, was sort of absent, although his father made an accusation about a neighbor sexually molesting Dahmer when he was 8 years old. But for people like Dahmer, it's not that you're treated terribly in the home, it's that it's years of just being really lousy at social relationships. And those are different pathways that could lead to a sense of wanting to level a playing field, being angry at the world, so forth. And in that aloneness, these individuals tend to develop very intense fantasies that ultimately get blended with sexual drives that are all about dominating and controlling people and getting them to sort of do what you want them to do, so you don't have to rely on your own inadequate self. And for Dahmer, that took a very particular and very unusual form. But ultimately, with these serial offenders, there is that same kind of desire for domination, control. And the fantasies are enough at first, but eventually they have to give way to acting out in increasingly awful ways until that fantasy is perfected.
Siobhan Scott, he also said something got out of control. What is that something that's getting out of control?
Well, I think his ability to contain his behavior, it just became obsessive with the desires that he was having. And apparently that was something that continued and got worse over time, as is often the case.